Let's talk about the music choices that you made. And for me, what really hooked me in was Hello, Space Boy, because I love that film. I don't hear it, and I love that song. I don't hear it enough. I've loved it since 1995. And it was such an unusual choice to kind of open the film with, and such a surprising choice, because there were certain key songs you didn't include, like Rebel Rebel or Fame or Sound and Vision or Fashion. And you did opt fairly frequently for the less of the greatest hits.
One of the great joys of doing these music films is that I've done 3 of them now, and I've had no input from music supervisors or the artists about what songs to use, even with the Rolling Stones. And what was weird was when they toured after Crossfire Hurricane, I think they were playing with like 80 or 90% of the playlist that I had worked on. So, the benefit and the advantage is I gravitate towards songs that resonate with me on some level. On Moonage Daydream, the playlist was the first piece of the script that came together. And I had arrived at this idea that the through line was transience, but I didn't know how to and impermanence, but I didn't know how to structure it. So I decided to play a game. One of the things with David is you realize, he has this great saying that I think borrowed from when someone once called him pretentious. He was like, of course I'm pretentious. I don't know why that's a bad word. Pretentious, the root of pretentious is pretend, to play. And I like to make art playful. Anyway, I sort of had landed on this through line, and I said, okay, I'm going to come up with this game. Let's pick 3 songs from every album going back to the 67 that relate to this through line in one way, shape, or form. It could be overt or it could be not so overt. It could be a song that was constructed through the Burroughs cut-up process, or it could be a song that sort of reflected sort of gender fluidity and sort of these other themes that were kind of offsprings of my through line. And so I did it. I did it in real time, just looked at the song titles, picked 3 that spoke to these themes, and wrote them down. And that's how the script started to come together. And I started to see ways of these sort of connections. And that also enabled me to create a playlist that some of them were hits and some of them were, oddities, if you will. It really was able to hit a balance. So I never really had a moment where I sat down and said, okay, let's make sure we have a certain number of hits and a certain number of, oddities. Space Boy, that is I can really address that one. And that's a bit of a heady conversation. So in 2007, I was invited to pitch David, to meet with David and pitch him a hybrid nonfiction film. And the meeting, we met at his office in Midtown, and almost immediately he launched, and he said, he complimented me on the film I had done called The Kid's Face in the Picture. I said, thank you very much. And then he just launched onto this vitriolic attack on a movie I just finished called Chicago 10. And it was, sort of criticism that no one really does to your face. And he was doing it in an absolutely gentleman-like manner. He wasn't agitated. He was like, oh, I had the opportunity to see your film Chicago 10. It was dreadful. Hated it. Like, really? He's like, oh, absolutely awful. But he kept going. And at one point, his assistant was in the room, Coco, and turns to me and said, what's your favorite Bowie song? And this came right off David's Attack. And I looked at him and said, well, you know, to be totally honest, David, I can't say I've really appreciated anything you've done since Scary Monsters. And David looked at me and went, touche. And the reality is I hadn't been paying attention to his music since Let's Dance. I didn't even listen. I had no idea. I was just, you know, he had sort of jabbed me. I was stung and I was immature and I, you know, threw it back at him. Ironically, Carlos Alomar recently told me that that's probably the reason David responded to me and I ended up doing the film. Because he said David liked when people kind of would go toe to toe with him. But this wasn't toe to toe. This was just me being very childish. And when David passed, I started to go back and go through his catalog and found myself, it's very hard for me to talk about this. I loved and continue to love his work from Outside to Black Star. And it's probably my favorite Bowie music. And the guilt that I felt at that realization that I had leaned into what was like kind of the cultural critique of him was something that was really difficult, you know, and there was never going to be an opportunity to tell him, you know, apologize. And so, excuse me. So going into the film with this deep love and admiration for work that I knew had been predominantly overlooked, I was like, I'm going to have a very even approach, balanced approach between the 70s work and the 80s work and the more contemporary work. And so going into the project, very conscious and deliberately, I moved Hello Space Boy to the top because I wanted to kind of announce that, you know, hey, if this isn't your Bowie music, you might want to leave. Like, you know, this is not just going to be a nostalgic trip. In its worst kind of, I guess the worst thing I could say is I was sort of trolling the audience, playing with their expectations. In fact, very literally, I queue up a few strands of Space Oddity. I run a piano line of Life on Mars, and you're like, oh, here we go. And then I pull it back and go into Space Boy. Not only Space Boy, the Pet Shop Boys remix of Space Boy, which was not on anyone's bingo card before they saw the film. And you know what's great about the Space Boy, the Pet Shop version, which, and again, here's something I'm happy to admit. When I grabbed that, I wasn't looking for the Pet Shop Boys remix. I went into my Avid bin, I pulled Space Boy, the first Space Boy I saw, dropped it in there. Subsequently discovered it was the Pet Shop Boys remix. I was like, oh, this is kind of perfect. I loved how they incorporated the cut-up process. I loved that it was an appropriation and a filtration, and the lyrics of the song spoke so directly to the theme of the film of chaos and fragmentation. I mean, this chaos is killing me. You cannot announce it more clearly. The fact that he was recycling Major Tom and returning to themes that he had started several decades earlier was something I also took to heart in terms of using repeated imagery and allowing the film to kind of create a kind of discourse with itself. So Space Boy worked for me on so many levels. What was really interesting was when I came back to it at the end. So the film in script form was going to spend some time with David in the studio in '97 and on stage with him on the Earthling tour and take you up through the reality tour. You know, those sort of areas. And I felt that after he met Amon and found his groove again, if you will, that my story had concluded, that it was just kind of at that point going to be like, look, this is another great album he did, and another great album, and Heathens, oh my God, it's even better than, you know, Earthling and Outside. And then, oh my God, Next Day's kind of like, it was just gonna be all these great albums to all serve one point, to say he's back. And so coming full circle from the beginning of the film back to where you don't really understand the orientation of Spaceboy, and the idea of the film being a sort of mandala, the sort of circular thing, was like, we're coming back to Spaceboy, but we're coming back to it with a vengeance. And he's now performing it. And it's powerful. And he has definitely got his, whether you like it or you don't like it, the passion and the intensity of his performance is, he's so committed that he's clearly wiped away this idea of being an entertainer from the 80s. And that particular number was something that I deliberately wanted to employ VHS elements, you know, any dirty dubs I could find of him, we would dirty things down. I just wanted it to be a total mishmash of all these fragments that would come together to create this explosion. And even in the musical construction of that live performance, you know, his band, you know, they had a click track, but they every show was a little different, which is why I had to watch every performance, because you just didn't know. And it turned out that my favorite performance of Spaceboy was from Tel Aviv, from my 97, I want to say 97, 96, 97. But there was no, all that existed was a 2-track mask, a stereo from the Beta SP. And everything from our film was from stems, but I was so connected to that version that we used that and then built the song from there, started incorporating different stems from the Paris show that year. I get to the mixing stage and we didn't have enough stems for the panning effect that we had designed for the film. So I called Reeves Gabrel, David's musical director from the period, and said, do you have any stems? Do you think it might be possible to record a guitar track so I have something to work with in the mix? And Reeves said, oh, you know, we have this click track that I can send you from the birthday show. Tell me what you think from there. He sent it in. It added to the pie. I then called Mike Garson, David's pianist, and said, Mike, is there any way you can give me a piano line for Spaceboy? I sent him the Tel Aviv show. He gave me an hour later, sent a file, and we added, in real time, added that into the mix of this on the stage, compensated with some effects to give some real sonic weight to it. And it's, I think, David and Paul, the two re-recording mixers, and myself's favorite musical moment of the film.